I woke up to the sound of my neighbor screaming. But not just any neighbor. Candace Whitmore, 51, the self-proclaimed queen of Maple Hollow, our quiet, gated community in Northern California. She stood at the edge of my property, face redder than a fire hydrant, shrieking like a banshee. Her voice was piercing, echoing through the cul-de-sac like a warning siren. But that wasn't even the best part. There she was, her brand-new luxury SUV completely trapped, perched helplessly in the center of a massive trench I had legally dug around my driveway. A trench, I might add, equipped with a fully functional, medieval-style drawbridge that I could raise or lower at will. Rewind 2 weeks earlier, and none of this would have made any sense. Back then, I was just Caleb Mercer, 42, a regular homeowner who just wanted some peace, maybe grill a steak on the weekend, and enjoy a life free from nonsense. But peace was impossible with Candace in charge of the Maple Hollow Residential Council. She treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She measured grass heights with a ruler, fined people for the wrong tone of beige, and issued letters if your car had a leaf on it. I'd had my share of passive-aggressive run-ins with her, but I never imagined it would turn into war. It all started one morning when I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and saw her massive SUV parked directly across my driveway. At first, I figured it was a mistake. Maybe she was dropping something off. But nope. She stood there on the sidewalk, arms folded, with that smirk she reserved for moments she knew she was about to ruin someone's day. "Morning, Candace," I said, trying to stay civil. "You're blocking my driveway." "Oh, I know," she said, tilting her head innocently. "It's council business. We've had complaints." "Complaints? From who?" "That's confidential," she said, waving a hand like a royal decree. "But your driveway doesn't comply with neighborhood standards. So, until we conduct a proper review, I'll be keeping my vehicle here. You know, to prevent further infractions." I blinked. My driveway was a basic concrete slab. No fancy tiles. No fountains. Just a driveway. "You're joking." "Nope," she chirped, pulling out a clipboard. "Oh, and don't bother calling a tow truck. That'll be considered harassment. Council rules." I stood there stunned. I knew better than to argue. Candace thrived on confrontation. It gave her fuel. So I nodded, bit my tongue, and went back inside. The next few days were hell. Every morning, her SUV blocked my access. When I contacted the council, they dismissed me. Tow companies wouldn't help, citing vague community regulations. Candace strutted around like she owned my property. Then came the fines. Apparently, because I couldn't use my driveway, I was in violation of neglecting maintenance. Every time I opened my mailbox, another letter was waiting, more fees, more threats. But I wasn't about to roll over. If Candace wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. I dove into the Maple Hollow community bylaws, zoning codes, and local property ordinances. I read for hours, days even. And that's when I found it. A single clause that changed everything. There were no restrictions against temporary security modifications on private property. As long as it wasn't permanent, it was legal. I double-checked, triple-checked, even called my old friend Marcus, a real estate lawyer, to confirm. Once I had the green light, the fun began. The next morning, I rented an excavator and hired a small construction crew. I told them what I wanted: a trench, deep, wide, impossible to cross without help. They thought I was nuts. I didn't care. By the end of the day, my driveway was completely surrounded by a 4-foot-deep moat. And the next phase? A drawbridge. It wasn't just a ditch. It was a full-blown medieval-style moat encircling my driveway, 4 feet deep, wide enough that no car could pass over it without airborne capability. The construction crew thought I was unhinged, but I paid well, and they asked no questions. By sunset, the job was done. My driveway had become a fortress. The next morning, Candace Whitmore, 51, stormed over, heels clicking furiously on the pavement. She had her gloating face ready, until she saw it. Her luxury SUV was stranded in the middle of the trench like a beached whale. The look on her face? Pure panic. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked. "Oh," I said casually, trying not to laugh. "Just some security modifications. Perfectly legal, by the way. Maple Hollow Residential Council rules say I can do it." Candace's eye twitched violently. "You can't just dig a hole around my car." "Sure I can," I said, sipping my coffee. "This is my property. Since you wouldn't move, I had no choice but to build around you." She looked like her brain was buffering. You can't. This is illegal. I pulled a paper from my back pocket and handed it to her. Zoning ordinance, right here. I even filed a permit. City approved. Her jaw clenched so hard I could almost hear the enamel grinding. You're going to regret this. The council will not allow it. I shrugged. We'll see. Then I walked back inside, leaving her standing in shock. But here's the kicker. That was only phase 1. The moat was just the beginning. If Candace thought that was bold, she was about to witness something even more absurd. The next morning, I awoke to furious banging on my front door. I didn't need to check the peephole. I already knew who it was. There she stood, looking like she'd spent the night plotting my assassination. Her cheeks were flushed, fists clenched, and her voice cracked with rage. You need to fill that hole in right now, she barked. I took a slow sip of my coffee, deliberately enjoying every second of her meltdown. Oh, you mean the trench? I asked. Can't do that. It's a legal security measure. Candace let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a banshee's wail. You have exactly 24 hours to fix this, or I will make sure the council buries you in fines. I tilted my head thoughtfully. That's interesting, because I was just about to start on the next phase of the project. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of project? I smiled. A drawbridge. Her jaw dropped, then snapped shut, then dropped again, like a fish gasping for air. You can't just build a drawbridge in a suburban neighborhood. Actually, I said, I can. Temporary structure. Not a permanent gate. Completely legal. And considering how concerned you are about my driveway, this should make you feel better. She stormed off, muttering threats about city inspectors, lawsuits, and how I'd regret this for the rest of my life. Let her try. I'd done my homework, and now, I was actually enjoying this battle. I spent the next several days gathering materials, hiring skilled labor, and documenting every step. The design was straightforward: reinforced wood, strong metal hinges, a basic pulley system. The kind of thing you'd see at a Renaissance fair, only functioning. I didn't just build it. I recorded the whole process for documentation and entertainment. I had a feeling this would be internet gold. As expected, Candace escalated. She called in city inspectors. They arrived with clipboards and concerned expressions, but left laughing and shaking their heads once they saw my permits and perfect compliance. Next, she tried organizing a petition with other homeowners, but it fell flat. Turns out, most of the neighborhood was just as sick of her as I was. She even tried blocking my contractors from entering the neighborhood, until one of them turned out to be the brother of a city councilman. That didn't go her way. Finally, the drawbridge was complete. It was beautiful. A solid wooden platform, rising and falling with the pull of a rope. The moment I tested it, lifting the bridge and sealing off the driveway entirely, a cheer broke out from 2 neighbors watching across the street. And Candace? Oh, she lost her mind. She came storming out of her house, screaming, "You can't have a medieval fortress in the middle of Maple Hollow." I looked at her calmly. "It's not a fortress," I said. "It's a security feature. You know, for protecting my property. The council encourages safety, right?" She let out a strangled yell and stomped back inside. But deep down, I knew she wasn't done. And neither was I. This is insane. You can't have a medieval fortress in the middle of the neighborhood. Candace Whitmore, age 51, shouted from the edge of the trench, her voice echoing through Maple Hollow like a siren on fire. "It's not a fortress," I replied calmly, sipping my coffee. "It's a security feature. The Maple Hollow Residential Council encourages safety improvements, remember?" She let out a strangled, furious sound, stomped her expensive heels into the dirt, and stormed off. I thought that would be the end of it. But I had clearly underestimated Candace's obsession with control. Later that night, I was jolted awake by the faint sound of rustling outside. I peeked through the blinds, and there she was, Candace, flashlight in hand, creeping along the edge of the trench like a raccoon with a vendetta. She crouched low, inspecting the drawbridge with laser focus, probably hoping to find a weakness. I grabbed my phone and hit record. "Looking for something, Candace?" I called out through the window. She jumped, nearly falling into the trench. "I was just making sure this ridiculous setup isn't a hazard." "You mean trespassing?" I said. "Because that's what it looks like." She scowled, then straightened up like nothing had happened. "I'm on the council. I have the right to inspect potential violations." I laughed. "That's cute. But last I checked, the council doesn't own my property. And don't worry, This video's going straight to my lawyer. Maybe the internet, too. I'm sure they'd love to see the council president sneaking around private property at midnight. Her face drained of color. Without another word, she turned and power-walked back to her house. By morning, Maple Hollow was buzzing. Word of Candace's moonlit stroll had spread like wildfire. Neighbors started to murmur. Some chuckled. Others rolled their eyes. Her usual veil of authority was starting to crack. She tried to spin it, of course, claiming she was just doing her duty. But no one was buying it. Meanwhile, my trench and drawbridge video had gone viral. Thousands of people online were praising me for standing up to HOA tyranny, some even dubbing my property Fort Mercer. Candace knew she was losing ground. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. The fines began rolling in. Nonsense violations like unauthorized modifications and unsightly structures. She even roped in her last few loyalists to file noise complaints, despite the fact construction was long finished. But I was ready. What she didn't know was that I had been collecting receipts for weeks. Misused funds, faked violations, intimidation tactics, records of Candace using HOA money for personal travel and home office decor, which included a suspicious $700 candle order. Turns out, she wasn't nearly as careful with paper trails as she was with measuring grass height. I compiled everything into a thick, tidy folder labeled Operation Reclaim the Neighborhood. Then came the final showdown. Candace had called an emergency council meeting to address my community violations. I walked in calm, confident. She sat at the head of the table, smug and ready. "We've decided that your modifications violate neighborhood standards," she declared. "You'll need to remove them immediately or face legal action." I smiled, placing my folder on the table. "That's interesting, because I've found a few other violations." She blinked. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and began listing off her misdeeds: unauthorized fines, misuse of funds, harassment of residents. The more I spoke, the paler she got. "You're lying," she snapped. "I have proof," I said, holding up copies of receipts, emails, and financial statements. "And I'm ready to hand it over to the city." Silence fell. The other board members, long silenced by fear, suddenly looked very, very interested. Minutes later, a vote was held. Candace Whitmore was officially removed as president of the Maple Hollow Residential Council. By the end of the week, an official investigation was launched into her conduct. That night, I stood on my driveway, sipping a cold drink as I watched her SUV get towed away, not by me, but by city authorities. Her reign was over. It had all started as a joke. A trench and a drawbridge to keep a petty tyrant off my driveway. But it ended up being the perfect trap to reveal the rot underneath her rule. And the best part? My driveway had never looked better. Candace went quiet after the meeting. No fines. No flyers. No smug glares across the street. Which was strange. Because if there's one thing I knew for sure about Candace Whitmore, she wasn't done just yet. But I could feel it. Candace Whitmore was brewing something. Even after being stripped of her power, the neighborhood was still buzzing. People had started treating me like some kind of local legend. Every time I stepped out to grab the mail or walk the dog, someone would wave, flash a thumbs up, or ask to see the drawbridge in action. Even the mailman got a kick out of it. But I wasn't naive. I knew Candace wouldn't go quietly into HOA exile. The storm came. And just like all storms, it started small. First, there was an anonymous report filed with the city about unpermitted construction. A zoning official showed up unannounced one afternoon, clipboard in hand. I braced for confrontation, but when he saw the drawbridge, his expression shifted from stern to amused. He inspected it, nodded, and said, honestly, kinda genius. Then he left, confirming I was fully in compliance. Next came the wave of petty complaints. Loud noises at night. Suspicious trench activity. Claims that the drawbridge could cause structural instability across the neighborhood. I knew exactly who was behind it. But with no solid proof, it was just another game of harassment. Then she crossed the line. It was past midnight when I woke to a loud crash. My heart skipped. I ran to the window and flicked on the outdoor lights, and that's when I saw it. The drawbridge was down, not lowered. Broken. The ropes had been cut clean through. The planks were splintered, lying at awkward angles in the trench. I sprinted to my phone and pulled up the camera feed. And there she was. Candace, in all black like a budget ninja, crouched inside the trench, bolt cutters in hand. She had actually climbed into my moat and sabotaged the mechanism herself. I didn't hesitate. I called the police. By the time they arrived, she had scurried back to her house. But I had the footage. Crystal clear. Time-stamped. Unmistakable. The officers knocked. After a tense few minutes, Candace was dragged outside, still screaming that she was the victim. She claimed she had been preventing a neighborhood hazard, that it was her civic duty. They weren't buying it. She was arrested on the spot for trespassing and property damage. And I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, as they stuffed her into the back of a cruiser. The next morning, Maple Hollow erupted. For years, people had endured her nonsense, too afraid to speak up. Now, they were emboldened. Neighbors who had once stayed silent admitted they'd been waiting for this moment. Some even baked cookies and left notes at my door. One house had a sign that read, "Fort Mercer, where peace was won." The Maple Hollow Residential Council had no choice. They held an emergency vote. Candace wasn't just removed from the board. She was permanently banned from all council involvement. It was unanimous. But the avalanche wasn't done. A few days later, I received an email from an investigator working on HOA fraud cases. Apparently, the evidence I presented during that now infamous meeting had raised some serious red flags. They wanted everything. I handed over a folder packed with proof, false fines, doctored meeting notes, credit card statements showing council funds used for personal spa days and out-of-state vacations. One transaction even linked to a suspicious offshore account. Within a week, the investigation turned into a full-blown case. Candace wasn't just a control freak. She was a full-blown scam artist. When the news broke, Maple Hollow lost its collective mind. People who once cowered now openly mocked her. A few residents even hung up "Free at Last" banners on their fences. Her house, once the pristine monument of HOA elitism, went up for sale. But it lingered on the market. No one wanted to buy what had become the dictator's den. Eventually, she had to sell it at a loss and leave town. The day she moved out, I stood at the edge of my driveway and watched her pack the last of her things into a moving truck. She gave me one last glare, hollow, defeated. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast. Victory had never tasted so sweet. With Candace gone, the council crumbled. Most members resigned. The neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. And so, Maple Hollow was finally free. No more petty fines. No more threats. No more rulers with clipboards. I installed a small plaque at the base of the drawbridge. It reads, "Here lies the reign of red tape." And every time I lower the bridge, I remember why it's there, not just to protect my driveway, but to remind everyone what happens when you stand your ground. Let me know if you want the final chapter, Candace's viral legacy, and how Fort Mercer became a local legend. The remaining members of the Maple Hollow Residential Council quietly stepped down one by one, and within days, the neighborhood voted to dissolve the council entirely. No more absurd bylaws. No more threats disguised as warnings. And finally, no more Candace Whitmore breathing down our necks like the queen of red tape. It was as if a fog had lifted. For the first time in years, Maple Hollow felt free. As for me, I became something of a local legend. Word about the trench and drawbridge spread far beyond our gates. News outlets reached out. My videos went viral. Strangers from across the country sent emails thanking me for standing up to HOA madness. Some even asked for tips on dealing with their own tyrannical boards. The drawbridge, fully repaired and now a permanent fixture, became the crown jewel of the block. Kids nicknamed my place Fort Mercer, and the small plaque I added at the edge of the trench read, "Here lies the reign of red tape." It always sparked conversation. One evening, while I grilled steaks in the backyard, an older neighbor wandered over. He'd lived here longer than anyone. He'd seen it all. "You know," he said, watching the sun dip behind the trees, "I always figured someone would take her down eventually. Just never thought it'd be with a drawbridge." I chuckled. "Sometimes, you gotta get creative." He grinned. "Whatever you did, it worked." And as I flipped the steaks, I realized something. For the first time since moving in, I truly felt at home.